Hello, welcome to another Musing On video. So as I think I mentioned in recent Musing On videos, I'm being strangely drawn again to the 1990s generally. In this episode, it's going to be about albums from 1990, the actual year, the year, not the whole decade, just the year. Because I have noticed that one of my recent Musing On videos I've done in the last month or so, which was for 1999, has been one of the most popular videos on my channel for a long while. So I thought I'd give another 1990s themed video a go. So I'm going to jump backwards and forwards with these as I work through the decade for different years and get to talk about the albums from that year that I have fond memories of. And also talk about albums that were out that maybe I either listened to retrospectively or haven't really listened to much at all, but I do know that they had, say, big singles off of them. So that's where I tend to go with this. But what was interesting, particularly this morning in preparation for this video, is more often than not, if I'm thinking about doing a video on a particular day, while I'm out walking beforehand, I'll sort of rehearse my preamble. And in the preamble, I was going to talk a little bit about what I was doing in terms of projects outside of the music I was listening to in 1990. And as I sort of rehearsed that preamble, it got so long that I realised that that deserved a video in and of itself, and maybe several videos. So as part of this sort of obsession at the moment with things 1990s, I'm going to be doing some other Musing On videos where I talk about specific projects or educational studies or career stuff that I was involved with during that time. Because for me, out of all the decades, I think the 1990s had the biggest influence on everything I did afterwards. And I know I've had one or two requests to do videos about the sort of things that where I reflect on stuff that I've learned over time, those sort of, what would I tell myself now that I know now back then. So that proverbial time machine. And so watch out for some of those Musings On episodes where I talk about stuff to do with process improvement and education and all those things that I've had a hand in. But like I said, I needed to take that out of the introduction because as I rehearsed it when I was out walking, it did turn into a series of videos. Because I was going, I should mention this or I should mention that. So, yeah. So the preamble is about me choosing a preamble in this video. So let's talk a little bit about, or talk a lot actually, about 19 albums from 1990. And I thought the best way to do this is I'm going to push pin, if you like, albums that I listened to, what's the word I'm looking for here, in real time, if that makes sense. So as they came out, I bought them and devoured them. So we'll go through chronologically. There's a couple at the end, I'm not sure when they came out, or at least one actually. And then I'll loop back round and we'll go through and do a proper sort of scroll through the year on Wikipedia in terms of the album releases that they've just sort of summarised. And then I'll do my usual thing, but I'll do it at the end again, of looking at film releases, because that's always an interesting thing to hang it on as well, because I noticed there are a few things there. So I've again tried to avoid going too far down the rabbit hole before I did this episode, but obviously I've got some stuff up here all ready to go, which I did just before I started recording. So yeah, first album from that year that I really devoured would have been this album, Carved in Sand, third album by The Mission, or third regular studio album, because I think they slid in like a compilation album early on, which brought together all their really early singles, and both 7-inch and 12-inch, which I'm trying to even remember the name. Oh, that's it. So yeah, the first chapter's a bit of a strange one. It was their second album they released, but it was a compilation of their stuff. Great if you're trying to track down some of their early releases. But yeah, Carved in Sand, and it's got the track Butterfly on a Wheel. That's the big track that I remember. And we'll talk about this album again at the end, because there's an interesting thing that happened with this album towards the end of the year, and I bought that album as well. Yep. So the Mission were definitely still doing pretty well. So we're after stuff like obviously Wasteland. The singles off of this, I suppose what the big one was Butterfly on a Wheel, and the second of 2 top 10 albums, an overall best-selling album in the band's career. 4 singles, there we go: Butterfly on a Wheel, Deliverance, Into the Blue, and Hands Across the Ocean, stroke Amelia. But yeah, I had a quite nice run of singles in the UK charts from like the mid to end of the 80s up to this point, really. And in terms of after this, we'll come on to, because I want to talk about them again in a moment. You've probably seen the album I'm going to talk about already. So February the 16th, this album comes out. So this is the third album by Death, and at this point I would say this is probably my step on year, I think, for death metal. Pretty sure, because I remember buying this when it came out, and then buying Leprosy retrospectively. This is where I have a bit of an issue. I may have even bought Leprosy in 89, but definitely 1990 was a sort of pivotal year for me in terms of extreme music, and we'll talk about some other albums that came out that year. There's one in particular actually that sort of fully pivoted me into death metal. And we get this album. So you can see here I'm flip-flopping. I'm listening to like extreme metal and alternative rock. So yeah, this came out. House of Love. It gets confusing because they also have a debut album called The House of Love. A lot of people call this the Butterfly album because of the butterfly on it. It took me a while to warm to this album. I did one of those things I think used to happen a lot with me, is I really loved the single Shine On. Just awesome single, and bought it off the strength of that. And then I was a little bit disappointed by the album, but like anything, repeat listens over and over and again in the car, it got me into it a lot more. And I did listen to this about a year or two ago, and just it was great re-listening to this. But yeah, the big one for me was Shine On. Okay, yeah, this was a big album, and I played this a lot. So I'd had a real run with Depeche Mode, and this I think was the last Depeche Mode album I bought in succession. Anything after that I bought after the fact. So I'd had a pretty good run in terms of buying albums when they came out, from around the time of Music for the Masses. So here, and when I got into this, I then infilled really aggressively around that time. Bought this when it came out, watched the documentary, and then bought Violator. And this has got Policy of Truth on it, World in My Eyes, Enjoy the Silence, which that was covered by... what's the name of the band? covered a few times. Yeah, the Lacuna Coil. It's on Karma Code. Yeah. Now oops, hang on. Right, file later. Jumping around a bit here. So let me go to the track listing. This track as well, which wasn't a single as far as I know. Waiting for the Night. I had this on a playlist I created when I digitized all my CDs, but just before I went over to streaming, which had an interesting collection of songs on it. Actually, it had Waiting for the Night, Descend the Shades of Night, I Go to Sleep by Descend to the Shades of Night by Machine Head, I Go to Sleep by The Pretenders, and a few other tracks. And I used to listen to it late at night when I was sort of goofing off on the internet, or blogging or whatever, or doing research, just with the sort of lights out and just the glow of the laptop, and I had this was on the playlist along with other things, and then I sort of added it to it a little bit over time. Yeah, there was another band on there as well. I'm trying to remember the Third and the Mortal. I can't remember if it was the track Magma or not, but yeah, it was a pretty cool playlist for nighttime listening. Yeah, so I was still following Celtic Frost at this point. This to me was a good return to form compared to Cold Lake, although I didn't dislike Cold Lake. It's a little bit weird, some more sort of glam metal influence in it, but yeah, this was a really cool album. And yeah, definitely when I put it on and listened to it the first time, you could definitely hear stuff harking back to earlier music, but also again their tendency to experiment as well. And as it says, different sound from the first two albums, or the avant-garde of the third. But again, it's like there's certain lyrical musical elements that it retained. And it was the last studio album before they dissolved. It also includes a cover of David Bowie's Heroes as well. But yeah, I played that a lot. And we get onto this one, Cowboys from Hell. In fact, I was going to bring up an extra tab, which I forgot, but it doesn't matter, because I first heard the track Cowboys from Hell when I was actually must have still been listening to the Friday Rock Show in 1990, maybe on and off. And I remember the track coming on and being blown away by the sound, and then going out and buying the album. And this, I was trying to think, like, about all the albums I played during the year, this is up there as probably my most played album. I'll try and flag up as I go through the list, like the 3 or 4 albums that I just played incessantly during the year, and a lot of them got played when I was out walking on the forest. So generally, if an album becomes a sort of album I would play when I'm out walking on, some form of Walkman at the time, because I was still buying a lot of cassettes. In fact, I read somewhere that 1990 was the peak year for cassette buying. But at the time, I was tending to buy cassettes because they were convenient for either listening on, basically listening to on the go. I was still buying the odd piece of vinyl here and there, but generally it was cassettes was mainly what I purchased. I didn't have a CD player at that point, I don't think. No, I didn't, actually. There's lots of notes about this being one of the defining albums of the early 90s metal, and a little bit of the a sort of secondary nudge, I suppose, for doing some videos about 90s music and other 90s things was I dug out my copy. The Terrorizer did like a retrospective look at the 90s in February 2000, and I still have a copy of the magazine. So I was looking through and looking at all these 90s extreme metal albums, and so that nudged me as well further down this road. But yeah, in doing that, you notice that what albums tend to crop up on these sort of best of lists from different publications, and yeah, this is one of them. And as it says here, Cowboys from Hell, along with Vulgar Display of Power. And I'm sure when I get around to talking about 92 in a later episode, we'll be talking about Vulgar Display of Power. With these album related musing ons, or sort of year related, when I talk about albums, I'm going to flip flop back between them. So I did one, just the first one I did, I think, was on 1999. So I'm going to do one on 1990 and then do one on 1998 and do it that way, and then end up right in the middle. And yeah, Cemetery Gates is a favourite. This always would come on in a real cool time when I'm walking on the forest. And also I'd often go out for these either early morning or late night walks, or late evening walks, where, you know, dawn and dusk, and it would be really eerie out where I'd walk on parts of Ashdale Forest Golf Course, and the mist would be rising from the grass, you know, as the temperatures change, and you get this and you get this track on. It's just so cool, so evocative. But yeah, this was my step on for the band. And again, there's another, you know, lucky accident of tuning into the Friday Rock Show. That at that point, I think I mentioned I was listening to On and Off, and they happened to play this, you know, the lead track. I thought, that sounds pretty cool. And also at that time, there was a video series out, and I'm trying for the life of me to remember what it was called, that you could buy, and it featured, yeah, metal bands, and I suppose it was really through that I became aware of the Florida death metal scene, but also some other bands as well. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the video series, but yeah, it was one you'd have to sort of go and buy. But as a result of seeing Annihilator being interviewed, I got into this band as well. This is an incredible album, actually. Yeah, I was blown away at just how tight Jeff Waters' guitar playing is. I believe he was offered a position at some point in Megadeth. Yeah, and we'll get on to Megadeth in a moment. 1990 is a real interesting time for Megadeth, actually. But yeah, this album, and it's probably, I would say, yeah, up there with Cowboys from Hell as another album that definitely got played a lot when I was out walking. It's funny, we've got a run of 3 here. So here's another one, Cause of Death. It's another death metal album. It's got James Murphy on it as well, who also played on, funnily enough, which I didn't mention, yeah, he played on Spiritual Healing as well, as a sort of hired hand. So yeah, so there's some lead guitar work on there that sounds very similar. He has a certain style about him that I really like. So it's his sort of sound. Yeah. He didn't contribute to the riffs, but there's something about his lead work that is very distinctive. And there's a whole backstory as well around this album cover and connections to Sepultura, and about how it was intended to be used for Beneath the Remains, but wasn't. Also got a cover of Cycle of the Tyrants on it as well. Pretty good cover of that. And again, I became aware of this as a result of Obituary being interviewed about the album on some sort of video video series. Again, I'm trying to rack my brain to remember. Was it Hard and Heavy? I think that was it. I think that's what it's called, Hard and Heavy. Yeah, so this was a big album that year. Considered like as a comeback for the band. It's got Thunderstruck on it, and I did buy this when it came out. I wasn't really keeping up with the band, but I actually did own Blow Up Your Video as well, funnily enough. Can't remember who made who. Yeah. But yeah, Thunderstruck. And yeah, Chris Slade actually played on this album. And there was a change in the way they wrote songs as well, as I think as a result of Brian Johnson being available for a few months. So that affected sort of future songwriting practice for the band going on, beyond this album. Yeah. Thunderstruck. Okay, so along with Cowboys from Hell, Never Never Land, Cause of Death, this is another album that I played a lot this year. So 4 so far that I would say were my sort of big, continually listened to albums for that year. Rust in Peace. Yeah, this got played a lot everywhere. I was already into Megadeth prior to this. I got into them around the time of what was it, Peace Sells Who's Buying, when I again heard them on the Friday Rock Show in this case 86, way back then, when they play, what track did they play? Wake Up Dead. Yeah, I was really interested because I was sort of a little bit into fusion guitarists as well. You were seeing sort of bubble through into thrash, and so that there's a really interesting, it's almost like jazzy fusion guitar in those first 2 albums, just because of the background, I believe, of the guitarist and the drummer. But we get up to Rust in Peace, so different lineup for So Far So Good So What, which I bought when it came out. I really love this album as well, actually. It's got some great tracks on it. It's got In My Darkest Hour, which is really good, and Liar and Hook in Mouth. Cool album. So Jeff Young played on that, and then he was out of the band, and we get 1990 Rust in Peace, and awesome album. It probably would be my favourite from that year, actually, out of all the ones I'm going to mention as being my top ones. But Marty Friedman's playing on it is just something else. I mean, the playing of everything on this album is something else, but his playing, and as a result, I checked out this album. I remember buying a Marty Friedman tuitional video about guitar. Became pretty obsessed, actually, by his guitar playing, because he has a really interesting way he angles the pick, and some other stuff as well. And he has interesting, the scales he picks are really interesting, and his phrasing as well. Yeah. But if you've never listened to this album, you need to check it out. mean, yeah, some real pinnacle album. Yeah, genre-defining work. This, I mean, yeah, we'll end up probably talking about a lot of genre-defining works in the 90s, actually. So, last album to feature their full original lineup until his return for Christ Illusion. I was very lucky to actually see the band with the lineup, but later on in their career. Unfortunately, at this point, I missed out on this. They played London around this time, and I didn't go to see them. So it'd been really cool to see them. A friend of mine went. Seasons in the Abyss. Yeah, so this is another one of my favourites from that year that I played a lot. And I think the other interesting thing with these is, in addition to, which helped me playing these when I'm in my car or out and about, I was playing these albums with friends as well. So, yeah. So this was the thing, I think, for a lot of people. You had, this sort of run of albums. So we've got Rain in Blood, which is, I think, considered to be like another one of these sort of definitive albums. Almost like, you could use the terms of industry standard for that particular style of music. And then they follow it up with South of Heaven, which is, not the same frenetic pace. So rather than, and I remember reading interviews at the time or listening to them, and they told them and said, we're just not going to top Rain in Blood. It's just not going to happen. So we're not going to even try and do that. So you get a slowing down in the tempos, and I actually really enjoyed South of Heaven because of that, because they sort of dialed it back and didn't try and outdo themselves. So I don't have any problem with that. But what was then cool is it gave them the ability to, you've got this sort of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So they then get this synthesis album, which when I listened to just did make me go, wow. It's like, okay, yeah, they've managed to combine, the best bits of, even though, I suppose you could say Rain in Blood is just full of best bits, but they just managed to mesh together that. Still not, by any means changing how, amazing Rain in Blood is, but just, taking this sort of somewhere else with a combination of what had gone before. Yeah. So another one for me that's really sort of up there. Yeah, played that a lot. So Crazy World was the last Scorpion album that I bought when it came out. I'd had a really good run with the band. I got into them as a result way back in, was it 1980, 81, when I stayed on a year. Someone I used to hang out with when we were on study period. We used to listen to two albums. I might have told this story before. One of them was Scorpions' Tokyo Tapes, and the other one was Live at Budokan by Cheap Trick. And as a result of just listening to Tokyo Tapes over and over and over again, which was basically different lineup from this, but I got into them around that period, and then started to buy albums as they came out around the time of Animal Magnetism, Blackout period. And then really, if I go back in time, every year an album would come out, I'd buy it. So yeah, from around about just after Animal Magnetism came out, I bought that after the fact. I infilled a ton of earlier Scorpion stuff back when UD John Roth was their lead guitarist, and then you get up to this period of the band, and we have this lineup, which I believe lasted for a really good run up until Crazy World. And I think at this point, this was when someone left the band, didn't they? Let me just check. Yeah, so I think it might even say in the article somewhere, because I'm sure that's where I read it. Yeah, so this was the last studio album to feature the Love Drive era lineup. So yeah, so that was a really, I really loved that lineup. I like the previous lineup, but yeah, it's the nice thing with the Scorpions is both lineups have their own sort of distinctive sound, and you can like both. Right? It just and they got such a depth to their back catalogue. But yeah, this would be the last album in a run of me buying them as they came out. It's got where is it? Wind of Change on it, basically, which is a big hit. Okay, I'm going to include a compilation album here, because this did have extra tracks on it which weren't on the albums. I had Justify My Love on it. I love this album. So it's actually up there, although it's a compilation album, with Seasons in the Abyss, Rust in Peace, Cause of Death, Never Neverland, and Cowboys from Hell as something that got played a lot while I was out walking, and got played a lot on Summer Walk. When did this come out? This must have come out before. Oh, actually late in the year. So yeah, I know the album I'm thinking of actually as well, but I would be out walking on the forest during the day. But this album, along with one of the later ones, I think, were popular cassettes for me to play in the summer when I was out walking on the forest. Yeah. Yeah, so we're up to November now, wow. Cool. And then this album, so the Mission put together a compilation album towards the end of the year, but they put together a lot of the tracks here were tracks that were originally recorded for Carved in Sand, hence the similar name. And also some acoustic versions, stuff like that. So a really interesting mixture. There's interesting mix of A Butterfly on a Wheel, actually, which I really liked. So yeah, that really interesting sort of bookend albums. Didn't probably play as much as the other ones that I've highlighted, but still enjoyed it. And then this one, Dirty Column, I believe this is the album. One of his albums has this interesting factoid about it, in that it was the first album to be released in DAT format, but I don't know if this was necessarily it. But one of his albums was like the first album to be actually listed, and I don't think there were many albums by bands that were listed as DAT, like DAT, released as DAT if you remember in the course of the history of cassette formats, so we have, you know, the compact cassette format, and then there was it DAT, which was a digital format of tape, and it was primarily, I believe, used as a studio sort of recording or master creation format, but, you know, could, you know, obviously be used to play, or to release stuff for just general consumption, you know, like the normal music buying public. But then not long after that, they released a sort of version that was between that and original compact cassettes, which was like a digital cassette format, which was slightly less heavily engineered, so cheaper to produce. And they also released those mini discs as well at some point. So there was a sort of plethora of digital formats suddenly came out. But yeah, I remember one of his albums being released on the DAT format, but I just can't remember whether it was this one or not. But I did have this album on actual just regular cassette. Yeah. Yeah, this album. So this was Chris Poland's solo album, very shreddy, produced by Randy Burns. There was a lot of like, you know, solo albums released by guitarists in this time period. I mentioned Marty Friedman had an album out. I think Steve Vai had an album out this year, actually. Passion and Warfare, I think that was out, maybe. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff out. Yngwie certainly had an album out this year, I'm pretty sure, if I've got my memory correct. We'll probably see when we go through. So, you know, I was a lot into that. Yeah, this is a really good album, actually. So one thing I found out the other day, which I didn't realise, is that Chris Poland did actually play on some demos for Rust in Peace. And if you pick up the 2004 remix bonus tracks, these 3 tracks have actually got his lead work on them, just his lead work. So it's interesting to see how much of the rhythm tracks are just Dave Mustaine. And then obviously at some point Marty Friedman came in and recorded the solos, did the lead guitar. It does actually just say guitars here, so I don't know how much he, you know, double tracked rhythm parts or how that works with the band. I can't remember what their sort of modus operandi is in the studio. Like in some instances where you have that set up with 2 guitars, you might find that one of the guitarists records all the rhythm tracks, and then the other guitarist just does the lead work, and then when they're out playing live, they just sort of obviously double up, and the lead guitarist does play rhythm tracks as well. But for studio purposes, the rhythm guitarist just does or the person that does the rhythm tracks does all the double tracking, maybe. But, you know, it's different from band to band. So, but I can't remember how that was divvied up for this particular album. And also might have been some timing issues as well. You can see here there's a little bit here about circumstances around this. Yeah. Oops. Okay. So those are my sort of, I suppose, what would you call top picks of the year, and the toppest of the top picks, if you like, were Immaculate Collection, Seasons in the Abyss, Rust in Peace, Cause of Death, Never Never Land, and Cowboys from Hell, might even say Violator. I did play a lot. I used to play this a lot when I used to drive home and I was caught in traffic. Yeah, I used to have a horrendous commute in that where I worked, sort of, there was no way where you could avoid not going through parts of a major town at rush hour. But it wasn't a big town, if you like, but it was a very popular town. And there were several industrial estates around it and people that worked in the town centre. And so it was really difficult to sort of find ways around. And I can remember, it would feel like you're in traffic for felt like hours on, but it wasn't hours on end, but it just, it was like nose to tail. And I always found that particularly sort of grim in the winter. So I spent a lot of times during the year. So I just have this vision of me sitting in a certain part of an estate, on the way out from where I worked, which was on an industrial estate, just nose to tail traffic, trying to pull out onto like another main road where there weren't any traffic lights. That was the main problem. So yeah. Okay, so let's just go through this, talk about a few other albums that either I didn't talk about here or I've retrospectively listened to, because these were all ones that I listened to in real time. I've got a sort of nice reminder thing off to the side here. I don't know if anybody remembers, but quite a while ago I did albums that take me back to 1990, where there wasn't any talking in like this is. It was just a slideshow type thing. So I'm sort of using that to just make sure I, hit certain things. So yeah, start of the year is really interesting. With these albums that I'm going to now highlight, they're all either going to be retrospective listens or stuff that I've not really listened to properly at all. So Scumdogs of the Universe came out. That was their second album. Flood by They Might Be Giants had Birdhouse in Your Soul on it. And then we had this album by The Sundays. So it was their debut album. Now the lead track off of that was the track Here's Where the Story Ends. That was it. But all three of those albums, well, these two I haven't listened to till way after the fact. This I've never listened to, actually. I've probably heard a few of the few tracks off of this played on the radio. Okay, so this album, I'd actually seen the Choir Boys back in the mid to late 80s in Brighton. I can't remember who they were supporting. I can't remember who the main band was. I do know that another band called the Babysitters, which were like a sleazy rock and roll band, like a three-piece, were also on the bill. And I have trouble remembering whether I saw the Choir Boys and they were supporting New Model Army or whether it was somebody else. I think I went to the same venue twice and I just don't remember the lineups. They were fairly similar. So I just can't remember who was headlining, but I did see the Choir Boys there. Lightning Seeds, haven't listened to this album, but this has got Pure on it, which was a big hit in the UK. Then we've got Fish's debut album, Virgil in a Wilderness of Mirrors. I listened to this for the first time the other day, actually. Never really listened to it. Didn't really listen to anything beyond what he did in Marillion. We got Chill Out by the KLF. A lot of some of the KLF and some of the Orb albums actually can be quite difficult to find on Spotify. I didn't check to see how this exists. There's some other weird albums. Wasn't there a KLF album that got withdrawn? There's been, over the years, there's been some sort of sampling issues and various other things with, I think, both the Orb and the KLF, which have caused problems with releases. But yeah, as it says, does what it says on the tin. Yeah, first Paradise Lost album. Yeah, they were the first of the Peaceville Three. So those were the three UK bands that were on the Peaceville label: Paradise Lost, My Dying Bride, and Anathema, who had an album out. So all of their debut albums fall into the category of Death Doom. And then each of those bands went off down various musical rabbit holes after that. Paradise Lost went a bit more sort of gothic, and then sort of flip-flop went into electronica, and then backwards and forwards, and so on. Yeah, so that all three of the bands have played around with either similar genres or completely different genres. Is that the debut album by Primus? Yeah, never listened to it actually. Blue Sky Mining by Midnight Oil. I did own this. Is this the one with... No, it's not. The one I'm thinking of is... Yeah, Diesel and Dust. So Diesel and Dust has put down that Weapon. But yeah, Beds of Burning put down that Weapon. And then on the strength of that, I did buy this album, but I don't remember listening to this that much at the time. I had already mentioned, I won't go back through and mention obviously the stuff I've already mentioned. There's some other albums like Shake That Your Money Maker. I got a copy of this out of the local library, listened to it at the time. That had Hard to Handle as a single, which was, amongst others, which is big in the UK. Beautiful South. Didn't listen to that album. I did go and see back when members, or a member particularly, which is... I did have to click through and find this. Paul Heaton was in a band called the House Martins, and I saw them in the 80s. And the other interesting connection is, of course, the bass player from the House Martins is in fact Norman Cook, also known as Fatboy Slim. So yeah, I saw this band around the time of their debut album, maybe just after that, and then they had that big hit with like a cover of Caravan of Love. Was it a cappella? Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Interesting choice of singles. There's Spiritual Heaving, Spiritual Healing, Carved in Sand. Yeah, I didn't listen to that. Oh, Blackout in the Red Room. I think I've mentioned this before, actually, maybe when I've done some other albums. There's a couple of people at work later on after this came out, it would have been, that kept on and on about Love Hate, those sort of albums. Yeah, it may have been a lot later, like 92 when I heard about them. Yeah, 1990 I was doing this really interesting job. What was my title? Quality Support Project Leader. So it was a interesting job, primarily doing customer complaints, but that was a what would you call it? It was a job that was a requirement of FDA, so it came out of that, but it didn't take, dealing with customer complaints during the course of a month didn't take the whole month, but the idea behind my spare time was used to look at process improvement stuff, which I'd got a reputation for doing. So, through computerization and various other methods. And so the customer complaint stuff was like a legal requirement in terms of, or an FDA requirement. You had to have like a customer complaints log, and you had to have someone that was dealing with the stuff and resolving it. And when they came and did an inspection, they'd always start off with the customer complaint log and work out from there. So it was a pretty serious job, but the amount of customer complaints we got, fortunately, was reasonably low. So when I wasn't resolving that list and dealing with it and writing reports at the end of the month, writing management reports and dealing with client, end users, I was developing, improvement techniques and programming and writing code to do that, and various other things as well. That's what I was up to in 1990. But I'm going to do a separate episode on all those things, because originally I was going to talk a lot about it in my preamble and then never got round to it. But what made me decided not to do it, because it was going to take too long. But this is why this reminded me of, because a couple of people I'm thinking of actually worked for me when I later on, between 91 and 93, when I had to go back to previous departments to sort of help out in a management role, because they'd sacked the previous manager there. So yeah, anyway. Backstreet Sympathy by Thunder. Yeah, there was that big hit. Was it Love Walks In? Love Walked In. Yeah, that was a big hit. I did go and I've seen Thunder a couple of times. Not surprisingly, that I don't know if they still do it. I don't know if they're still going. They always used to use Thunderstruck by AC/DC as the music they played before they came on. But I saw them at least twice as like a support band for a bigger lineup. Both times I think in Brighton. One time when they were like support to some version of Deep Purple, fairly far on in their career. So that would have been in the 2000s actually. And I also saw them, I don't know if they were supporting, there's quite a big bill with Whitesnake on as headlining, and another one which had Alice Cooper. And one of those two, I think, Thunder played support as well. So yeah, I did see Thunder after the fact, but I didn't buy this album until probably the 2000s actually. Certainly not in the 90s. It was interesting, I saw Booyah Tribe come up. Didn't listen to this album at the time. It's their debut album. I did listen to a later one, and I just can't remember the name of the title. It came out around the same time as Pulp's His and Hers, because I remember buying them together. Bit of a contrast there. Yeah, I remember buying... So this would have been later in the 90s, and we'll probably get there. Well, we will get there at some point. And I bought His and Hers and whatever the name of the Booyah Tribe album was that was released around that time. And then took a week off. But because I didn't have any money to go away, I was sort of buying a PC on, like, hire purchase or whatever over a period of time. I ended up just playing Doom for a week and listening to music. It was pretty cool. But that was a lot later. That was later into the 90s actually. Yeah. There's a Synod Connor out. Yeah, I bought this when it came out. It's got Nothing Compares to You on it. You got Beg to Differ by Prong. One of my brothers had this, I think. It's a Pushead designed cover. Yeah, there's a lot of... I remember there's a lot of what Pushead Metallica shirts around about that time. I've probably had one as well. Soundtrack to Pretty Woman. Soundtrack to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I did have this album. This was a live EP. Now, I'm trying to remember who played on. So Zakk Wylde played on. Yeah, No More Tears. Okay, so yeah, I think this was the first time I'd heard Zakk Wylde playing live. I think something. It's interesting. It's got Sweet Leaf and War Pigs on it. There's a lineup for the time. Actually, Geezer Butler's was playing bass at that point in the band. Yeah, there's Violator, which I spoke about earlier. Also, we've got still got The Blues came out then, which I didn't listen to at the time. The debut Social Distortion album, and at some point, maybe it'll come up in a moment, we've got Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet. There you go, yeah, Fear of a Black Planet. I had a lot of friends who were listening to this, so that's how I ended up hearing it. Actually, I think ultimately I did own a copy, but a lot later. But there was not much point because I'd hear it all the time. Oh, Act 3 by Death Angel. Was this the one before or after they had that horrendous accident? Sure. Yep, so this has 911. It's a joke. Is a joke. Welcome to the Terradome. Yep. Okay, there's Vanity Nemesis. Oh look! Wow, Green Day's debut album. I did not like that. Okay. Yeah, so the one that I listened to a lot was Dookie. Also got Hammerheart by Bathory. Wasn't really listening to Bathory at that point. I remember this coming out, Spanking Machine by Babes in Toyland. Were they one of like the original Riot Girl bands? Maybe? I don't know. Yeah. Did hear it, but didn't own it. Good Son by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds came out then. So by then he's what? Bad Seeds are... Well, he's 6 studio albums in for that particular setup. Although, of course, various band members have come and gone over the years. What was in the band at that point was... Blixer was still in the band, okay. Harvey. Oh, Kid Congo Powers played guitar on it. That's right. He was wasn't Kid Congo Powers in the Gun Club? Yeah, and the Cramps. Okay. Oh yeah, Warrior Soul. Didn't really listen to them that much. Oh, Repeater by Fugazi. Now this is a cool album, but I didn't listen to it till a lot later. Yeah, Repeater plus 3 songs. Beats International, this was Norman Cook's band after the House Martins. And I think that had... what was there? Just Be Good to Me? Dub Be Good to Me. Was that on there? Let me bingo. Yeah, that was a big hit. But I don't think I ever listened to that album. I'm trying to think if anybody I knew had it. We saw this album at the beginning. It was just the US release was a little bit later. In Spiral Carpets, we're up to... I was going to say up to. This is their first studio album, which has Move, This Is How It Feels. So they're part of the whole Manchester scene. So that's going on in 1990. And then you got another band, Soup Dragons, are on their second album. They're like an alternative rock dance band. And I'm trying to remember where they're from originally. So yeah, they're a Scottish band. But I suppose they got lumped in a little bit. You know, there was I think I said there was sort of these very similar-ish genres, but because several of them were sort of mentioned, had a regional connotation. So you've got like Manchester, but then you've got other bands that definitely have the sort of alternative rock, alternative dance sort of crossover. But because they're not from Manchester, they're not Manchester bands. So there's 1990, a lot of interesting stuff going on then. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention actually, Billy Idol had Charmed Life out. I tend to forget about that album. Now there's a Yngwie album out. He's on his 5th album by this time, Eclipse. Who was vocalist on that then? That would have been Goran Edman. Okay. There's a really good live album just before they Trial by Fire live in Leningrad. I did have the VHS cassette for that as well. So yeah, I was on a bit of a Yngwie jag at that point. I think I mentioned about being into, shredders as they used to call them. All these sort of solo guitarists who could play very fast. This was Bruce Dickinson's debut album. Now I'm trying to remember who played on that. I remember them having this cover of All the Young Dudes. That's the one I remember. I didn't own the album. Yeah, Janet Gers, that was it. The only album by him I've got was the one where Adrian Smith was in the band, and I think it was a Roy Z produced album. Who did this one? This was Chris Sanjur. I can never say his name. Sanjur, I did. Alright, yeah. You know what I mean. Yeah, I didn't buy anything by him until, a lot later. Chemical Wedding, 1998. He was on that. Yeah, Roy Z as well played on that. So, a bit of a different lineup there. Yeah, Screaming Life Fop. So this was the compilation album by Soundgarden, which had their early EPs on it. I may have heard this inadvertently. I think my youngest brother had a cassette of it, maybe. I think he was starting to become aware of, grunge bands that were sort of lumped in with the grunge scene around that time. There was an Ice Cube album out. I wonder if we've got there yet. Sure. Lock Up the Wolves by Dio. There's also a Pretenders album. Yeah, none of these ones I bought, but I was aware of them. 10 by 1. Oh, there you go. America's Most Wanted. Debut album by Ice Cube. Yeah. First solo album after split from NWA. And we got the Soul to Soul album. Yeah, they did this interesting thing with albums that made them sort of look like greatest hits, I suppose. So I'm just trying to work out. Back to Life, was that on? Yeah, that was on the previous album, wasn't it? That's all what I can remember. Was it Jazzy? Yeah, Jazzy B. That was the name of the guy. Jazzy B. Buzzy B. Oh, Talk had a compilation album. Cool. Oh, here we go. Yeah, How to Pay by Jeff Healey. I didn't own this. There was a copy of it in the house. I can't remember who owned it. So that's how I ended up listening to it. Yeah. And we've got this album, which is a collection of cover versions by Billy Bragg. I did have that, but I think I bought it a little bit later. And we've got another popular indie band of the time. They were on their third studio album by then. This is James. And this has... Does it? Yeah, so was this done... Where is it? Gets a bit confusing because the reissues have sit down on them, but the original doesn't. Just because of the timing of the release of that single. So yeah, we got the album coming out in 1990, but Sit Down wasn't released until 91, which was their big, that was their big sort of single. And then, like often happens with a lot of albums, around about the time that gets released, they sort of repackage the record label repackage the album, reissue it, and then they slip in the the big single, take some stuff out, or take a track out. It's interesting, the American release has it as the lead. So again, you get sometimes when they swap the track listing round to suit the different market based on what's been out, what's popular, that sort of stuff. So yeah. Left Hand Path by Entombed came out. Swedish death metal, 1990. So yeah, we're in an interesting place death metal wise. Some major releases had come out the previous decade, so they probably noticed that Death are up to their third album by now. So there's some stuff in the 80s they'd released, and Obituary, Cause of Death was a second album, I think. So the first album had come out in the 80s. And then we've got bands like this from Sweden as well with their debut albums. Yeah, I bought this after the fact. Also, really early album by May, who've had some interesting sort of changes in their sounds over the years. So that was their debut album. I don't know what it was classed as back then. Death metal, death doom, symphonic black metal. Yeah. They would have been 1990, pretty ahead of the curve. In terms of what might be going on in Norway and Europe generally. So yeah. Now there was also a Mariah Carey album out. So the debut. I'm trying to remember what this had on it, because I don't know if I owned this or not. I don't think so. What a mix. Mariah Carey and Left Hand Path by Entombed. Yeah. Oh, another English indie band. This band was from Manchester. Again, some of these bands were like peaking a little bit later. So some of their biggest songs, more like in 91. But, Turtle Soup was an album by them in 1990. It goes back to its own thing. There's no separate article, unfortunately. Yep, just indie rock and this so-called baggy. Yeah, influences from psychedelia and dance music. Yeah, first album by Deicide as well. Where's that? There, yep. Yep, Florida death metal in the ascendancy in this period. EP by Manic Street Preachers. So yeah, this came out before their debut in '92. And then you've got second Danzig album, Lucifuge, which has, is it Long Way Back from Hell? Yeah. Snakes of Christ on it, Killer Wolf. Yeah, I have this album, but I bought it after the fact. Was aware of the band, but just again, you know, it's a bit of a limitation sometimes with funds. You got Goo by Sonic Youth, 6th album by then. So obviously a band that are pretty influential in alternative rock, with bands that were just about to break through or were coming through around that time, and a whole load of other bands as well. So yeah. Oh wow, there's a Gene Loves Jezebel album. Now, somewhere in a moment we might well see, oh there we go, Lights, Camera Revolution. Yeah, I probably more knew them from seeing videos of things like Possessed to Skate. Yeah. What's that got on it then? Oh, You Can't Bring Me Down. Okay. So, I think the first album I bought when it came out would be this album. I was on a sort of road trip down to Brighton, short road trip, going to a record fair, and I was there with a couple of people I knew, and one of them brought along this album, and I think Black Sabbath, oh I can't remember, the one where Dio had rejoined for just one album, Dehumanizer I think it was. Yeah. So listening to that and then listening to Dehumanizer, but that was, yeah, a lot later. But yeah, that was at this point I was aware of the band, but I wasn't really listening to. I didn't own any albums by them. Yep. Of course, the guy that ended up in Metallica via, I suppose, Ozzy. Dance. Oh, there's, yeah, the Brick by Brick album by Iggy Pop. I didn't own this. I think the last one by him, yeah, was a while back. Blah blah blah. That was it. That was the last time I bought an album by him. Got Aztec album. We're up to their 4th album by them. By then. Oh, that was the track Good Morning Britain, which was a collaboration with Mick Jones. Yeah, I remember when I heard that, thinking it was a Clash song. But Mick Jones does play guitar on it. Yeah, so we've got Acid House coming in this period as well. Blind Guardian album, 3rd album, so German power metal. And then this album, Mother Love Bone, Apple. So this had Andrew Wood on it and members of oh dear, Pearl Jam, sorry. My brain went blank for a moment there. Yeah. And then you had the Temple of the Dog Band, which was bringing together of various people as a tribute. Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. So yeah, I did own both of those, but no, it wasn't until after the fact. After I bought the Pearl Jam album. And then we've got Cowboys from Hell from Pantera, which I mentioned. Magnum were up to their 8th album by then. I wasn't really keeping tabs with them. I knew them probably more from around the time of Soldier of the Line, that period. I don't know if anybody remembers this band, Led Zeppelin. This weird mashup of dub and Led Zeppelin. And we've got Harmony Corruption by Napalm Death. I bought this when it came out. Quite a big difference in their sound. And this is the album where I first heard Barney on. Because prior to that, you've got From Enslavement to Obliteration, which is the album I bought, which when it came out, which is got Lee Dorian as the vocalist on it, and Bill Steer. So they both left, and then Harmony Corruption, you've got Barney coming in from, what was he in? He was in Benediction, wasn't he? I think that's right. And also, yeah, Mitch Harris and Jesse Pintado joining the band, or joining Shane Embury and Mick Harris. Yeah, they're an interesting band to look at just in terms of lineup, particularly around that first 3 albums. Things are a little bit wacky. Yeah, so okay. There was a Jellyfish album released that year, and I didn't get into them until after I heard their second album. So I bought this retrospectively a number of years later. But they're well worth checking out if you've not checked out Jellyfish. Yeah. This sort of interesting classic rock style. Spilt Milk is my favourite album by them. I don't know if they've only ever done 2, actually. Yeah. So that came out in 93, and I listened to that around about the time it came out. So I remember this album. I had a friend who was really big into this, so I only ever listened to it when they were giving me a lift, maybe, or we going out somewhere. Yeah, and you got Delight, World Clique. So there was a lot of dance stuff around as well. Bossa Nova by the Pixies. Didn't buy that until a little bit later, I don't think. Tear by Black Sabbath. Bought that a lot later. It's a really good album, actually. That I quite like this period in the band's history where they've got people like Tony Martin singing. On the albums. So yeah, well worth checking out if you've never checked out that sort of period. So yeah, that was just before Dehumanizer, 2 years before. And we've got Headless Cross, which I think probably was the first album of that incarnation that I bought, maybe. Yeah. It's got Tony Martin on it. But yeah. Well worth checking out if you haven't checked that era out of Sabbath. Rats Detonator, they were up to that. What would that have been? That would have been their 5th studio album. Yeah, I wasn't really keeping up with them. And of course this album came out that year, so debut album by Alice in Chains. It's got We Die Young on it, Man in a Box. Cool album. But I didn't buy it till a few years later. Business of Time had come out. 5th studio album. Now that has that got the time on it, or was that the previous one? Yeah, good Joe Jackson cover. I've always really liked their covers. Didn't State of Euphoria, the previous album, had Antisocial on it by Trust? Yeah, they always had cool covers they picked. This album, Ritual Delo Habitual by Jane's Addiction. Another one I'd probably listen to more because friends had it. Now, Living Colour were big that year, I think, weren't they, with Time's Up? Yeah. Oh, that's it, Vivid and then Time's Up, yeah. Again, a few people I knew were into that. There's a Frontline Assembly album out. I did buy this, but quite a while after, in the 2000s, I think. Might have been late 90s. I had this industrial metal like sampler that I bought, and it had one of their tracks on it. So I bought this and an EP by the band, I think, at the time. Soul Asylum. I don't know what are we up to by then with them. Yeah, they're quite a few albums in deep by that time. I more remember them because of this coming out right in the middle of grunge, or at least when I started to listen to grunge. And stuff, tracks like Runaway Train and that period. Empire by Queensryche. And this album was big. I never really listened to it. Had Freedom 90 on it. Waiting for That Day, Praying for Time. Yeah. Again, most of this I heard through friends that owned it. Wasn't really a big George Michael fan. Probably associated him too much with, I mean, he's a great singer, but I associated him too much with Wham, and Wham came out when I was big into, Nawubum, stuff like that. So I didn't really want much to do with that whole period of UK pop beyond all the sort of metal I was listening to. So yeah, I was tainted. Okay, then we've got stuff like the Rembrandts debut album. I think I mentioned Empire by Queensryche, the fourth album by then. It's got Silent Lucidity on it. My probably big album by them would be Operation Mindcrime from '88. Played that a lot, but not Empire. I think it was probably with them would be the earlier stuff I was more into. Rage for Order, and I'm trying to think of the first two stuff, because there was the EP, wasn't there? Was it Queen of the Reich? Yeah, that sort of era really up to Operation Mindcrime, and I didn't really keep up. It's funny because I worked with someone whose son was big into Queensryche. That's how I think I heard about the earlier stuff. Oh, Vanilla Ice. Yeah, Ice Ice Baby. And Warrant's Cherry Pie. Two albums there that I never listened to. I did mention this album. And interestingly enough, I wasn't really keeping up with Judas Priest at this point, so I didn't listen to Painkiller until years later. But yeah, that was out that year. Hello, Cool J, Mama Said Knock You Out came out. This album, which had... no, I don't know any of the tracks off of that. I probably completely lost track of the band by then. There's sort of a brief period around the time of, or just after Dare, I think, where I started to listen to the band, and then lost interest and then got into their really early stuff a lot later. in probably the 2000s, actually, when they were on that electronic documentary that BBC Four did, I think. Yeah, another industrial band, Meat Manifesto. Oh, Heaven or Las Vegas, that was their 6th album by them, by Cocteau Twins, so they'd had a good run all through the 80s. Room to Roam, Waterboys are on their 5th album. There's Cause of Death by Obituary, which I'd already looked at. AC/DC, The Razor's Edge. Rust in Peace by Megadeth. Somewhere in a moment we should see Steve Vai, Passion and Warfare. I did buy that when it came out. Yeah, at the time, I don't know, I was more of a fan of Joe Satriani than I was probably Steve Vai. I mean, I've seen Steve Vai and he was awesome live, and I think I probably like a lot of his later stuff. But some of that stuff I found a little bit too sort of quirky for me. It's a little bit hit and miss, whereas I found Joe Satriani and the other people I was listening to be a bit more straightforward. Prayer for the Dying had come out, I think, around that time as well, didn't it? Yeah, no, Prayer for the Dying, Iron Maiden. First album to feature Janet Gers because Adrian Smith had left. And then I think I mentioned that probably just after this I was up in London at a guitar show with a friend, and we saw Adrian Smith's band play, I think. But then also I think he was up there playing. But they definitely had an interesting sort of supergroup come together for a demo, which had Nico McBrain as the drummer, and then I'm trying to think who was. I can't remember, but there was Dave Murray, I'm pretty sure played, because he got him on stage. And I'm sure Paul Rogers sung, I think, on the track. And then they had a guitar guy who was a studio guy who also wrote for Guitarist magazine, somebody like that, also did second guitar. I can't remember who the bass player was. But they played, so there was this sort of weird... I think people got excited because people had seen Adrian Smith there. There were these two young Iron Maiden fans sitting a couple of rows down from us in the auditorium, and they were like wetting their pants because I think they thought when they dragged out Dave Murray, I think they thought that there might be some sort of impromptu get together, but that didn't happen. So. Okay. Moving on. I should have told people to make a nice beverage. Debut album by The Lars. This got snuck out, didn't it? Because I had never intended, I don't think, for this to be released. This... I don't know how I learned about this album. It was probably through the single There She Goes, which was actually a reissue from '88. Yeah, so I did. Sometime I owned this album, but I can't remember exactly when. Sorry. Yeah, precursor to the Britpop phenomenon. That's it. So that's it. That's Waiting in the Wings. Seasons in the Abyss. There was a Ride album. So shoegaze. So we've got shoegaze as well going on. So it's pretty full pond of stuff that I was getting exposed to, and I just couldn't keep up. I didn't buy any shoegaze at the time, but I was aware of this band. It's a really good album actually. If you've not checked out Nowhere by Ride, definitely worth checking out. For me, it was retrospectively. The remasters also came out that year, by Led Zeppelin remasters as well, actually. So I remember this being all over the front of record stores. And Souls in Black by Testament. Now, who played on that? Okay, so yeah. Because I'm pretty sure at some point James Murphy, who I mentioned earlier, is playing on Spiritual Healing and on Cause of Death. I'm pretty sure he turned up in Testament at some point later in their career. Can't remember which period, but yeah, pretty sure he's played on at least one of their albums. Back from Hell by Run DMC, 5th studio album by then. So yeah, we've still got some, obviously it never goes away, but yeah, hip hop as well. Recycler by ZZ Top, they were up to that by then. Yeah, their synth-driven production style, which sort of started with Eliminator. Behaviour by Pet Shop Boys. Vision Thing by Sisters of Mercy. I wasn't really keeping up with the Sisters of Mercy at that point. I just much preferred the original lineup. I did buy the second album with the bass player from, well, it would have been the Gun Club, wouldn't it? I'm trying to think of her name now. She ended up in The Damned as well at some point. Patricia Morrison, I think, was her name. Yeah. So, who played on Venetia? Oh, there you go. And she was replaced by Zig Sputnik guy, Tony James. Third album by Pop Will Eat Itself. Oh, the Charlatans had an album out as well, didn't they? Some Friendly. So this is their debut album. Yeah. Yep, acid pop, baggy and dance pop. And they were from Birmingham. Yep. Beautiful South album, another one, second one. That's got a little time on it, which was a big hit. Happy Mondays, I had an album out, and let's see if I can find this. It's going to be, oh, there we go, Pills and Thrills and Belly Aches, third studio album. What's that got in it? Oh, it's got Step on it and Kinky Afro, yeah. So, yeah, more Manchester, more baggy. Camera Souls by Creator, they're on their 5th album by then. German thrash band. Should have the, where's it gone? Oh, there we go. Crazy World, yeah. Scorpions, I mentioned that. You probably saw somewhere down here the Immaculate Collection, Madonna album. There's also Rhythm of Love by Kylie came out, their 3rd studio album, and Daniel Dax is a really interesting artist. It's an experimental album by her. Didn't listen to it, but I did hear one of her tracks on some sort of goth compilation. But I just can't remember the name of the track. 6th album by Echo and the Bunnymen. Naive by KMFDM. Cinderella had Heartbreak Station out, 3rd album by them. Yep. Blues rock band, sort of in the early days masquerading as a glam band, but definitely, you know, very bluesy style to them. Then we had bands like Enigma, who are really interesting. They're like a German musical project, and they've got this sort of new age world beat. There's Gregorian chants in it as well. But it was, you know, popular because it did fit in with dance rhythms at the time as well, and the fact that there were these chill out rooms as well, where they play stuff like, you know, the Orb and KLF and stuff like Enigma. So yeah. Those grains of sand which I'd mentioned by the Mission. And then Adamski, Dr. Adamski's Musical Pharmacy, which I'm assuming had Killer on it with Seal, which then Seal also released independently. Yeah. Yeah, so we got Adamski. You also got Gonna Make You Sweat by CNC Music Factory. It's a debut album. And then I did mention Meat Beat Manifesto, 99%. It's an electronic band. Dirty Column. And then a whole load of other stuff came out that year in no particular order. So there was a Osric Tentacles album came out, Planned. Killing Joke had an album out. So neither of those I listened to when they came out. I had also mentioned the band Forbidden in the episode on Machine Head. They had an album out that year called Twisted Into Form. Helmet, Strap It On came out actually that year. That was a big album for them. Let me see if it's gonna... I don't see it anywhere here. I may have accidentally skipped over it. Nocturus, The Key came out as well. Yeah, so they big sort of famous album that year. I mentioned Chris Poland's album. There's a Sacred Reich album out as well, The American Way. Oh, there's the Helmet album, Strap It On. Sacred Reich album, The American Way, that came out that year. We played that a lot actually in the house. And Into Darkness by Winter, I don't know if it will be listed here actually, who are, I suppose, what would you call them, a funeral doom band? Maybe, yeah. And then the band Zentrix, which maybe people don't know so well, which is For Whose Advantage, their album came out that year. In fact, if I quickly switch here, I might be able to bring up the album covers if people are curious about. Yep, so Nocturnus, The Key, looks like that. And Sacred Reich, American Way. That's a really good album actually. And Zentrix, For Whose Advantage, that's not going to come up probably because it's not that well known an album. And I had mentioned that Violence had an album out that year because I was doing that episode about Machine Head, and Forbidden also Twisted Into Form as well. And you can see here, I mean, there's lots of metal albums that year that came out, many that I missed over. There's another reason why I'm particularly sort of interested in the 90s and going down some various rabbit holes. There's a lot of 90s extreme music albums that I just completely missed out on, mainly because I couldn't afford to keep up with everything, and I'd got like a load of parallel musical interests in lots of different genres at that time. It was just trying to maintain like a diverse listening experience, but at the same time trying not to miss important stuff. But there were so many subgenres like coming out that it was just impossible to keep up with everything, and really that's one of the nice things, I suppose, in the age of streaming. I can sort of now go back and listen to that. I mean, back then, 1990, just, you weren't afforded that luxury to do that. And then finishing off, just a quick look at the highest grossing films that year. So we've got Ghost, Home Alone, Pretty Woman, Dances with Wolves, Total Recall, Back to the Future Part 3, Die Hard 2, Presumed Innocence, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Dick Tracy. Most of these of which I've seen, I think at the time the only ones I watched when they came out of the cinema would have been Total Recall and Die Hard 2. I'm not sure when I saw Presumed Innocent. I know I saw these two at the cinema because I remember going with a friend that used to, they'd gone away to university, and when they came back we used to go out to the cinema together. So yeah, I remember that. Maybe it's worth having a quick look at the number one films so you can just get a bit of a feel. You know, some of these I ended up watching on video after the fact. Yeah. Another 48 Hours. Yeah, I remember Ghost. Flatliners. Oh, Darkman. Not sure where I saw that actually. I've seen it. Smart for Death. Oh, of course, Steven Seagal had a lot of stuff out at that time, didn't he? Jacob's Ladder. I remember seeing that. Oh, yeah, so, but not at the cinema. That was a bit later on video. Yeah, so lots of interesting stuff out in the cinema at that point. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed that as much as I did going through it. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future video.